Welcome to Buffzone. My name is Ringo. This is Neill Woelk. We cover the Colorado Athletic Department for the Daily Camera newspaper. It's the first week of February 2009. That always means National Signing Day for football recruits and other sports, but mostly football recruits. Neill, columnists and head coaches don't always get along, don't always see eye to eye. But you and Dan Hawkins seem to have kind of a symmetry going in the way you view the people who are really, really, really into recruiting.
Kyle, it would appear that this recruiting class left you speechless. I will say this.
That's for sure.
I will say this, Kyle. I don't buy the recruiting services rankings. I don't buy into the 5-star, 4-star system. I think you judge a recruiting class the same way you judge an NFL draft class. You wait a couple years, you look at the players who came out of it, you look at how much production you're getting from that class, and then you decide whether it was a good or a bad recruiting class. To attach a number 48 ranking or a number 15 ranking to a recruiting class right now, I think is a shot in the dark at best. I don't think that it has any bearing on how good this or how bad this Colorado class will be. I think it proves itself out over time.
You don't think it has any bearing whatsoever? I mean, there's no way of using those star rankings as some sort of gauge?
Oh, I think there. I shouldn't say no bearing whatsoever. I think there. You can probably look at this class and say, yes, the USC probably had a better class than Cal Polytech. I think you can definitely look at that. I think you can make that judgment. I think you can look at it and say, yes, Texas had a better recruiting class than Colorado State. But I don't need the recruiting rankings to tell me that either. I can just shut my eyes and know that Mack Brown probably got better players than Steve Fairchild at Colorado State. That's always been the case. That always will be the case. The BCS school is going to have better players. But I do think that you cannot accurately judge a class until they begin to actually play. And 2 or 3 years from now, you look at that class and you say, okay, these are the kids that played. These are the kids that contributed. How good was that class 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, I tend to agree for the most part, although I do think there is a definite correlation between top 25 recruiting classes and the top 25 itself. I mean,
no, but that's
a lot of the same teams you're going to find in both sets of top 25.
But that's because they get a top 25. As soon as a kid is recruited by Southern Cal or Texas or Alabama, his star ranking goes through the roof. That's why they have top. The numbers come after those kids are starting to be recruited. I mean, you look at the kids that SC recruits, it's like Tyler Hansen a year ago. He was a 1-star quarterback when Colorado recruited him. He was a 3-star quarterback 3 weeks later when Michigan offered him a scholarship. Or when Michigan didn't even offer him, they recruited him. They showed some interest. He became a 3-star quarterback by sitting on his couch playing video games in the middle of the summer. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these classes is, Texas shows interest. Well, that kid's, star rating goes through the roof. You can't tell me that college recruiting services are better judges of talent for infinitely more kids than the NFL is for, far fewer players and far more at stake. And the NFL draft is a crapshoot at best. It's a 50% deal. Now, you can't tell me that the scouting services are going to be that much more accurate.
Yeah, I totally agree, and Mike Shanahan will tell you all about the
about the wonders of the draft class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Now, I will say this: you look at this and you say Colorado. No, Colorado didn't have the great quarterback in this class. Didn't have the big time running back. Didn't have any of the big time receivers. But they got some what I think will prove to be very solid, steady players.
Yeah, in the long run. I mean, you just said that they didn't get a great quarterback. I'm holding out judgment on Clark Evans.
But he wasn't a 5-star quarterback.
That's true. He was a 3-star quarterback, a pretty highly rated 3-star guy. But I think he has the potential to really turn into something special. I mean, you don't start 3 years at a high school program like he did at Los Alamitos High School in Southern California and run for 600-700 yards all 3 years, throw for more than 1,000 yards all 3 years. Lead your team consistently to wins and not have a huge upside. I mean, the guy is 6'5", 230 pounds right now. 6 months before training camp.
That means he's bigger than most linebackers he's going to see even in the Big 12, he's going to be as big or bigger than a lot of the linebackers he sees, and you have to like that size. So I think this is a very athletic class. I really like when you look at it, there seems to be speed, there seems to be size, and they filled a lot of holes that they need. The glamour may not be there, but I really think that 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to look back at this class and say, well, they filled a lot of holes with good players. And this is the type of class that I think is going to pay dividends as much or more than the class that had the Darryl Scotts and people like that, because it's going to be more far-reaching as far as filling holes across the board rather than having maybe 4 or 5 great players down the line.
So the Darryl Scott of this class is definitely defensive end Nick Casa from Legacy High School in Broomfield. And one of the reasons that maybe he lacks a little bit of the star punch or whatever, the attention-grabbing nature of recruiting and stuff is, in my opinion, is because he plays defensive end. He doesn't have the ball in his hand all the time.
Exactly.
He's not a running back. Running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, those guys tend to just get a little bit more attention, especially when they're highly recruited, when they're rated with 5 stars or whatever. But I think Nick Casa definitely has the potential to come in and contribute immediately and could really blossom into a star player in the Big 12.
That's the kind of kid you love to have is a big, rangy defensive end that has some room to grow, that's going to be able to rush the passer. And God knows, rushing the passer in this conference, the importance of that has increased tenfold in the last 5 years because everybody's throwing the ball. And if you've got a guy like that can come off the edge with a little speed and put pressure on the quarterback without having to bring in a corner, without having to bring in some of your linebackers, you're a big step ahead right away with your defense.
He's a bit of a freak of nature too. I mean, the kid is 6'7". He's speedy. I mean, he competed in sprint events for his track team last year as a junior in high school.
Exactly. It's kind of like the Javon Curse, and I'm not saying that's who he is, but he's that type of athlete.
Right. I mean, when he's rushing the quarterback, he puts his hand up in the air to knock down passes, and I mean, he's going to get a lot of he's going to make a lot of plays where he chases people down from behind, where he knocks down passes at the line of scrimmage. He's what you need, and Colorado needs to start getting more guys like that, and I think they will.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's a very athletic class. Good linebackers, some good receivers. They filled a lot across the board. Offensive linemen, you can never have too many. Now Hawk is going to go into fall camp with 15, 16 offensive linemen. That's a huge step ahead of where he was 2 years ago when he went into fall camp with like 10.
Right.
And so this is...
Actually, he's going to go into camp with almost 20 offensive linemen. I think 17 of them are going to be on scholarship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's an enormous change from just a couple of years ago. One of the big holes they had was at wide receiver. They didn't end up getting a couple of guys. One guy was Deontay Jackson. He was on their commit list for a long time. At the last minute on signing day, he decided to sign with Oregon. Through the grapevine, we've heard that maybe he had some pressure to go to Oregon from his family, his parents, his high school coach. Another kid was Emory Blake, a kid out of Austin, Texas, of all places. And offensive line coach Jeff Grimes goes to Auburn, and Emory Blake ends up at Auburn. And Jeff Grimes was like the guy who was, recruiting mm-hmm. Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that kind of
those kind of things always happen.
That happens. If they would have had those two guys, maybe the class would have been a little bit more special in some people's eyes. But I agree with you. I think it's a solid class overall. Adds some athleticism. Definitely upgrades the size. There's one guy in the class who's not 6 foot tall, and that's Parker Orms from Wheat Ridge. He's 5'11". I mean. Yeah. They're making progress in terms of getting bigger, faster, stronger guys.
Yeah. When I look at the recruiting rankings, yes, I think that you can tell when Southern Cal and Texas and those top 10 teams are recruiting great classes, those rankings have a meaning. My point is the difference between 48 and number 28 is absolutely zero when it comes to ranking those recruiting classes. It's just like in the AP Top 25. Tell me who the 28th team best team in America was last year and the 38th best team. You're never going to come to any kind of consensus, and I think that's what these recruiting rankings are.
A couple of years ago, you and I covered some Big 12 championship games. We covered, Colorado getting beat 70-3, Texas.
I try and forget that. Would you just quit bringing that?
But one of the things you and I talked about, in the aftermath of that game, kind of in the bowels of the stadium, looking at guys coming out of both locker rooms, is just the complete difference in the size and and
Just the athletic
athleticism
build, yeah.
and everything in the two locker rooms. I mean, it was striking. It was obvious. Too.
Well, you had a quarterback,
huge, enormous guys. Yeah. You had a guy in Vince Young who was
bigger than every Colorado
almost
linebacker.
every guy on the Colorado
eight guys,
defense.
Exactly,
Right, yeah.
8 guys on, and maybe that's not going to happen anymore.
Dan Hawkins, like I said a minute ago, is closing that gap, and I think that's a good thing in the long run.
I hope so. We'll see. Spring ball, what, month and a half away?
Yeah, begins on March 31st, spring game on April 25th, and then we have summertime and training camp.
Coach Mack says you got to be at the spring game.
Yeah, well, they got 18,000 last year. We'll see what they do this time around.
And we'll be back before spring. Tune in.
We will?
Yeah, we'll have something to talk
What are we going to talk about?